Hey Vision Chasers, it's Dr. Bird here. After the Civil War, former slave owners slowly regained control in the South as a result of the failed Reconstruction plans. Now, these former slave owners were very bitter about the outcome of the war, and they wanted to take it out on the former slaves who are now freedmen. Now, out of that anger and bitterness came the Jim Crow laws. Now, I've done a video about the Jim Crow laws, which a lot of people are watching, and I appreciate your support. And so I encourage you to check that video out to know a little bit more about the Jim Crow laws. But in a nutshell, the Jim Crow laws were designed to remind the freedmen of their lesser status in society. And so there were separate facilities for black people and white people. There was a black portion of the train, and then there was a whites only portion of the train. There were separate drinking fountains, there were separate public restrooms, and there are also separate schools. Sadly, in 1896, the Supreme Court would legitimize what was known as separate but equal. But that wasn't entirely true because there was not equality within those facilities. And that was especially true when it came to the schools. The schools designated for white students were far superior than those designated for the black students. And education was something that was so important to freedmen, and they realized that it was very important if they wanted their children to have a better life. And so there were numerous attempts to reverse this Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And sadly, most of these attempts were unsuccessful until 1954, when the Supreme Court was compelled to think differently. This video is dedicated to the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case handed down in 1954. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, was established in 1909. Now, their focus at this time was to stop the unlawful lynching that was going on around the country, and the victims were mainly African Americans. Now, later, their attention would turn to integration and getting rid of the Jim Crow laws. As a matter of fact, in the late 1930s and 1940s, they had a lot of success in opening up college admission for African Americans. My alma mater, the University of Missouri in Columbia, was involved in one of those cases. And by the 1950s, the NAACP is going to turn their attention to integrating elementary schools. Now, by the early 1950s, the NAACP is going to bring 5 cases against schools challenging segregation based on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, simply put, that means that everybody, no matter who they are or what they look like, they must be under the law, they must be treated equally. So by 1952, these cases are going to make their way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to combine them all into one case. And the following year, they're going to hear arguments from all 5 of these cases. Now, all these cases are very, very similar, where you have a black student who would have to take extraordinary measures to go to their designated school based on their skin color. Now, in many instances, the students are passing schools that are closer to their house in order to get to their designated school. So remember what I said, these 5 cases were combined into one case, and the case that was the, I guess you could say, headliner case, that was the Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas case. So let's get into that case a little bit. Linda Brown was the name of the little girl involved in this case. And sadly, not too long ago, she passed away. And in an interview that she gave in 1985, as she recalled the case, she talked about how she would start to walk to school, and it would be a very long walk to school, and she had to walk through some unsafe conditions and cross a busy street and stand on a corner to wait for a bus to carry her an additional 2 miles across town to get to her school. And sadly, there were times when she would cry because it was so cold during her walk. So Linda Brown is denied entrance to a school that is actually closer to her home. Now, this is an all-white school, and her father, Oliver Brown, is compelled to go to the court to reverse this decision. And it's at this time the NAACP asks the father, Oliver Brown, to join these other 4 cases. Now, one of the reasons this case was chosen to represent all 5 of the cases was because the father, he was a pastor, he was a highly respected member of the community, and it was believed that it would be very difficult to turn a deaf ear to his argument that his daughter deserved to go to a school that was closer to her home. So when it comes to making the argument to the Supreme Court on behalf of these 5 cases, Thurgood Marshall was chosen to lead the charge. He was the one that came up with the strategy, and he was the one to address the court. Now, Thurgood Marshall would make a number of arguments, but his main arguments concentrated on 2 things. Number 1, the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. There was a lot of evidence to show that these schools were not equal. They were separate, but they lacked in the equality department. The white schools were far more superior than the black schools. Additionally, Marshall's argument centered on the Dahl test. Now, the Dahl test was put together by Kenneth and Mamie Clark. Now, the Dahl test is pretty simple. They took a number of African American children, they placed in front of them dolls. Now, they were similar dolls except for the color of their skin. And throughout these tests, the black children would prefer the white doll over the black doll. And through this psychological test, the Clarks concluded that prejudice, discrimination, and segregation created a feeling of inferiority amongst African American children, and it damaged their self-esteem. Now, the school districts involved in the case, they would compel the court to just look at the Plessy decision. Just go with the Plessy decision, as the court had done many times before. But this time it would be different. In a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court reverses Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Chief Justice Earl Warren would deliver the opinion. The court believed that separate but equal facilities are inherently unequal, and they violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And the court was also convinced by the results of the Dahl test that segregation did instill in children a feeling of inferiority. And this had a negative effect on their education and their growth. So desegregating schools would not be easy. As a matter of fact, there was a part 2 to the Brown versus Board of Education case, and there were a number of other cases that would follow because desegregating schools would not be easy. And in 1971, the Supreme Court would actually give its blessing to the use of busing to actually integrate schools. And that would be a very important case in terms of finally integrating school. And as a matter of fact, busing is still used to this day in order to fully integrate schools. There is so much more regarding the Brown case, and in the description section of the video, I've included some links that will definitely help further your knowledge of this case. Additionally, we need your help. We're going to relaunch the Vision Chasers website, and there's something in the description section that you can do to support this channel and support our efforts in relaunching that site. So I would really, really appreciate it if you took the time to do that. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And lastly, I want to thank you for your continued support of this channel. Thank you so much for watching. And until we meet again, please keep chasing your vision of success. Bye.